Nothing destroys a soul faster than the ultimate betrayal by a destined mate. She was declared permanently barren, humiliated, and cast out into the freezing wilderness by the alpha she loved. But fate has a wicked sense of humor. 5 years later, she didn't return alone. She brought his triplets, and a fire-breathing nightmare. The sterile scent of rubbing alcohol and bleached cotton in the Silver Pines Pack Clinic did nothing to mask the suffocating tension in the room. Clara Harrington sat on the edge of the examination table, her knuckles white as she gripped the thin paper beneath her. The rain battered relentlessly against the clinic windows, a classic Pacific Northwest storm rolling off the slopes of Mount Rainier. But the chill Clara felt was entirely internal. Dr. Harrison, the pack's lead physician, and a man who had known Clara since she was a pup, refused to meet her eyes. He shuffled his manila folders, his heart rate betraying a steady, rhythmic spike of anxiety. "I ran the blood panels 3 times, Clara," Dr. Harrison finally murmured, his voice heavy with a forced sort of pity. "The ultrasound confirms it, along with your hormone levels. The damage from the wolfsbane poisoning you suffered during the rogue skirmish last winter. It's irreversible. Your reproductive system is entirely compromised. You are barren." The word dropped like a lead weight in the quiet room. Barren. For a female werewolf, especially the Luna of one of the largest packs in Washington state, it was a death sentence to her social standing. But Clara didn't care about the politics. She cared about the man standing by the door. Alpha Silas Blackwood stood rigidly, his broad shoulders tense beneath his dark wool coat. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles twitched, and his storm-grey eyes, usually warm when they looked at her, were currently fixed on the floorboards. "Silas," Clara whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. "We can find another way. We can adopt from the orphaned pups in the neighboring Cascades. A bloodline isn't just about biology. A bloodline is everything to the Silver Pines," Silas interrupted, his voice devoid of the rich, rumbling affection she had grown used to over their 3 years of mating. He finally looked at her, and the absolute coldness in his gaze made her breath catch. The wolf inside him was already pulling away, retreating behind a wall of duty and bitter disappointment. News traveled fast in a pack of 500. By the time Silas and Clara returned to the Alpha estate, the Council of Elders was already waiting in the Great Hall. Elder Thomas, a traditionalist with a ruthless streak, led the charge. The pack needed an heir, a strong, pure-blooded heir, to secure the borders against the growing rogue factions in the Olympic Peninsula. What Clara didn't know, what she couldn't have seen through the haze of her own heartbreak, was the shadow lurking behind the council. Victoria Kensington. Victoria was the daughter of the Beta, a stunning, calculating woman who had coveted the Luna title since childhood. Victoria stood by the fireplace, a perfectly practiced look of sympathy on her face, masking the triumph burning in her eyes. "The law is clear, Alpha," Elder Thomas announced, his voice echoing off the timber walls. "A Luna who cannot produce an heir cannot lead. She weakens the pack. She weakens you." Clara looked at Silas, silently pleading with him through their mate bond. "Fight for me," her wolf cried out. "I am your chosen." But Silas stood before the roaring fire, the weight of the pack pressing down on his shoulders. He looked at Clara, and in that split second, she felt the mate bond snap. It didn't just break. It shattered into a million jagged pieces, tearing through her chest with agonizing physical force. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her heart as a scream ripped from her throat. "I, Silas Blackwood, Alpha of the Silver Pines," he began, his voice booming over her cries, "hereby reject you, Clara Harrington, as my mate and my Luna. You are relieved of your duties and stripped of your rank." The pain was blinding. Blood rushed to Clara's ears, drowning out the gasps of the pack members gathered. She looked up, her vision blurred with tears, to see Victoria stepping smoothly to Silas's side, resting a manicured hand on his arm. "You have 24 hours to pack your belongings and leave the territory," Silas said coldly, turning his back on her. "Do not return." Stripped of her title, her mate, and her home, Clara dragged herself out of the estate. She packed a single duffel bag, leaving behind the expensive dresses and jewelry, taking only her survival gear, her thickest winter coats, and a hunting knife her father had given her. As she crossed the territorial border into the freezing, rain-soaked wilderness of the Cascade Range, she didn't look back. She would rather die in the uncharted territories than beg for scraps of pity from a man who had thrown her away. The first 3 months in the deep, untamed wilderness of the Cascades nearly broke her. Clara was a rogue now, a lone wolf without the protective tether of a pack to sustain her energy. She lived off caught hares and scavenged berries, sleeping in hollowed-out tree roots to hide from the freezing winds. But something strange began to happen in the 4th month. Instead of growing weaker from the isolation, Clara felt a surge of vitality. Her senses sharpened beyond anything she had experienced as a Luna. And then came the physical changes. Her stomach, which should have been hollowed out by her meager diet, began to swell. The morning sickness hit her with the force of a freight train. It was impossible. Barren, Dr. Harrison had said. Irreversible damage. One frigid afternoon, while tracking a deer near the base of a jagged, unnamed peak, the truth slammed into her. She pressed her cold, dirt-stained hands to her swelling abdomen and focused her heightened hearing. Beneath the rushing sound of her own pulse, she heard it. Thump, 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 thump. 3 distinct, rapid heartbeats. Triplets. The realization hit her with a sickening wave of clarity. She hadn't been barren. The supplements Dr. Harrison had been giving her to help her recover from the wolfsbane poisoning. They hadn't been vitamins. They had been low-dose wolfsbane inhibitors, laced into her tea, deliberately masking her scent and suppressing her fertility, just enough to fake the test results. Victoria Kensington's father funded the pack clinic. The betrayal ran far deeper than Silas's weakness. It was a calculated coup. A fierce, primal roar tore from Clara's throat, echoing off the snow-capped mountains. The despair that had anchored her for months evaporated, replaced by a white-hot, furious will to survive. She was going to be a mother, and no one was ever going to take her pups from her. As winter set in, bringing heavy blizzards that buried the forest in white, Clara sought better shelter. Following a faint, strange scent that smelled faintly of sulphur and ancient earth, she stumbled upon a massive, hidden cavern, concealed behind a frozen waterfall. The cave was unnervingly warm. As she ventured deeper, her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating walls laced with glowing, luminescent moss. At the very back of the cavern, resting on a bed of blackened, hardened volcanic rock, was a massive stone. Or so she thought. It was an egg. It was nearly 3 feet tall, scaled in deep, iridescent obsidian that shimmered with a faint, internal red light. Clara, driven by the intense maternal instinct flooding her system, didn't feel fear. She felt a profound, magical pull. Werewolf lore spoke of ancient creatures that used to share the earth before the packs claimed the forests, creatures of fire and sky. But they were just myths. Bedtime stories. She built her camp around the egg. For weeks, she slept pressed against its warm, scaled surface, the ambient heat saving her from the freezing temperatures outside. She talked to her unborn pups, and she talked to the egg, creating a strange, solitary family in the dark. The night Clara went into labor was the night the sky broke open with a freak thunderstorm. The pain was agonizing, tearing through her as she brought her children into the world alone on the cave floor. First came Liam, strong and vocal, then Wyatt, quieter but observant, and finally Stella, small but with a fierce, piercing wail. As Clara lay exhausted, cradling her 3 crying infants against her chest, a loud crack echoed through the cavern. The obsidian egg was splintering. A blinding, golden-red light spilled from the fissures. With a final shattering burst, the shell broke apart, and a creature stumbled out. It was a dragon hatchling, the size of a large dog, with scales like polished coal and eyes that burned like liquid gold. It shook off the remnants of its shell, locked its glowing eyes on Clara, and let out a trilling, chirping sound. It didn't attack. Instead, it crawled forward, curling its warm, heavy body protectively around Clara and her newborn triplets. The magic of a pregnant werewolf's aura, combined with the raw elemental energy of the mountain, had awakened it from a centuries-long dormancy. 5 years later. The dense canopy of the Silver Pines territory was just as Clara remembered it, though the political climate had decayed. Clara stood on the ridge overlooking the valley, the wind whipping her long, dark hair around her face. She was no longer the broken, weeping woman who had been dragged out of the Alpha estate. She wore hardened leather armor, crafted from the wild, her posture straight, her aura radiating a terrifying, untamed power. Flanking her were 3 beautiful 5-year-olds. Liam, Wyatt, and Stella possessed their father's storm-grey eyes, but they carried their mother's fierce, unbroken spirit. They were remarkably advanced for their age, their wolf sides already showing through heightened reflexes and strength, and looming behind them, casting a massive shadow over the pine trees, was Ignis. The dragon had grown to the size of a cargo van, its obsidian scales practically impenetrable, smoke curling lazily from its nostrils. Clara hadn't wanted to return, but a desperate, widely broadcasted distress signal from her younger sister Maya had reached her via a dying rogue. The Silver Pines pack was under siege by a massive, organized syndicate of hunters and rogue wolves. Silas was losing the war. Victoria had proved to be a useless, cowardly Luna, and the pack was on the verge of slaughter. "Mama!" Stella tugged on Clara's leather pant leg, her tiny brow furrowed as she looked down at the distant smoke rising from the packlands. "Is that where the bad man lives?" Clara looked down at her daughter, a cold, predatory smile touching her lips. "Yes, little wolf. That's where he lives." Ignis let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the earth itself, sensing his mother's rising aggression. "Let's go say hello," Clara commanded. The Blackwood Alpha estate, once a proud symbol of the Silver Pines' dominance in Washington state, was reduced to a smoldering fortress. The scent of burning pine and iron-rich blood hung heavy in the damp mountain air. Silas Blackwood knelt behind the shattered remnants of the estate's mahogany front doors, his chest heaving, his claws coated in the blood of 6 rogue mercenaries. The attack had been brilliantly, ruthlessly orchestrated. The Iron Fang Syndicate, a notorious coalition of rogue wolves and black market hunters, led by a scarred giant named Gideon Graves, had bypassed the border patrols entirely. They possessed inside knowledge of the pack's security grids, a fact that gnawed at Silas's fraying sanity. "Alpha!" a young warrior shouted over the deafening crackle of gunfire and wolf snarls. "They've breached the western flank. The clinic has fallen. We have to fall back to the panic rooms." Silas wiped a smear of blood from his bruised jaw, his grey eyes sweeping the chaotic courtyard. His pack was dying. Where was Victoria? His Luna was supposed to be rallying the non-combatants, leading them to safety. Instead, she had locked herself in the underground bunker the moment the first alarm sounded, demanding the best guards abandon the perimeter to protect her. The bitter taste of regret, a flavor Silas had become intimately acquainted with over the last 5 years, flooded his mouth. A true Luna would be fighting tooth and nail beside him. A true Luna like... He forced the thought away. He didn't have the luxury of drowning in ghosts. "Hold the line!" Silas roared, forcing his exhausted wolf to surface, his bones grinding as he prepared to shift. But before Silas could issue the command, the sky above the courtyard darkened. It wasn't a cloud. The midday sun was entirely blotted out by a massive, winged silhouette descending from the clouds. The sounds of battle abruptly ceased. The Iron Fang mercenaries lowered their weapons, staring upward in sheer, unadulterated terror. A sound like tearing metal ripped through the valley as Ignis let out a deafening, concussive roar. The dragon plummeted like a meteor, landing dead center in the courtyard with a force that cracked the asphalt pavement and sent a shock wave of dust and debris washing over the combatants. Ignis unfolded his massive obsidian wings, his scales absorbing the ambient light, his molten gold eyes locking onto the largest cluster of rogue attackers. He opened his jaws, and a torrent of white-hot, localized fire erupted, instantly incinerating the Syndicate's armored transport vehicles and sending the rogues scattering in a blind panic. Through the thick, swirling smoke and the settling ash, a figure emerged. Clara walked with a slow, predatory grace. She wore reinforced tactical leather, twin silver-plated hunting knives strapped to her thighs, her dark hair braided tightly against her scalp. She didn't look like a banished, broken woman. She looked like a goddess of war. Flanking her were three small figures. Liam, Wyatt, and Stella stood with perfectly straight spines, their little hands balled into fists. Despite being only 5 years old, their eyes glowed with the undeniable, bright gold luminescence of dominant alpha blood. They didn't flinch at the fire. They didn't cower from the dragon. They moved in perfect synchronization with their mother. Silas froze. His heart slammed against his ribs with such violent force he thought it might shatter. Clara. But the shock of seeing her was instantly eclipsed by the scent. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the 3 children directly to Silas. Pine needles, rain, and the distinct, undeniable metallic undertone of his own bloodline. The pack bond, severed 5 years ago, seemed to pulse with a phantom ache. "Mama, the big ugly ones are running," Liam observed, his high-pitched voice cutting through the stunned silence as he pointed a finger at Gideon Graves's retreating lieutenants. "Let them run, Liam," Clara said, her voice carrying a terrifying calm. She didn't even glance at Silas. Her eyes were fixed on the clinic ruins. "Ignis, secure the perimeter. Nobody leaves. Not until I find my sister." The dragon gave a low, rumbling chirp of acknowledgement and took to the skies again, circling the estate and exhaling warning bursts of flame to corral the terrified syndicate members into the center of the lawn. Clara moved with blistering speed. A rogue wolf, foolishly attempting to blindside her from the rubble, lunged. Clara didn't even draw her knives. She simply sidestepped the massive beast, grabbed it by the scruff, and hurled it into a stone pillar with a strength that defied biological logic. The dragon bond had permanently altered her, infusing her cellular structure with ancient, raw power. She kicked down the reinforced door of the medical wing's basement. "Maya!" A trembling, soot-covered woman emerged from beneath an overturned metal gurney. Maya Harrington gasped, tears streaking her dirty face as she threw herself into Clara's arms. "You came," Maya sobbed. "I didn't know if the message reached you. Clara, they knew. The rogues knew the patrol schedules. It was an inside job." "I know," Clara whispered, her eyes hardening as she stroked her sister's hair. She turned back towards the courtyard, where the remaining members of the Silver Pines pack were slowly emerging from their defensive positions, staring in absolute awe at the woman they had condemned. It was time to burn the rot out of this pack, once and for all. The courtyard was eerily silent, save for the crackle of burning vehicles and the heavy, rhythmic thud of Ignis pacing the perimeter. The remaining Iron Fang Syndicate members were bound on the lawn, disarmed and terrified under the dragon's watchful gaze. Silas stumbled forward, ignoring the bleeding gash on his shoulder. He couldn't take his eyes off the 3 children standing defensively around Clara's legs. Wyatt bared his tiny teeth at Silas, a low, rumbling growl emanating from the child's chest. It was a perfect mirror of Silas's own defensive posture. "Clara," Silas choked out, his voice cracking. He dropped to his knees, the mud soaking into his torn trousers. I don't understand." "Of course you don't, Silas," Clara said, her voice ringing clear and cold across the ruined courtyard. The surviving pack members, including the arrogant Elder Thomas, gathered around the edges, watching the spectacle. "You never did possess the ability to look beneath the surface. You only saw what was convenient. The heavy steel doors of the underground bunker finally hissed open. Victoria Kensington, immaculate in a pristine cashmere sweater that starkly contrasted with the blood-soaked battlefield, stepped out. 2 personal bodyguards flanked her. When she saw Clara and then the dragon, all the colour drained from her perfectly contoured face. "What is this?" Victoria shrieked, her composure shattering. "Guards, kill that beast! She brought monsters onto our land. She's a traitor." "Silence!" Clara's voice boomed with such unnatural alpha-commanding furor that several lower-ranking wolves whimpered and dropped to the ground. Even Silas flinched. Clara walked slowly toward the center of the yard, pulling a crumpled, blood-stained leather journal from her tactical vest. "Maya told me the rogues had inside knowledge," Clara announced to the pack. "But the betrayal didn't start today. It started 5 years ago, in that very clinic." Clara nodded to Ignis. The dragon snaked its massive, scaled head into the ruins of the clinic and violently dragged out a cowering figure by the collar of his white coat. Dr. Harrison was thrown unceremoniously at Clara's feet, weeping and babbling. "Tell them," Clara commanded, her eyes flashing with dangerous amber light. "Tell them what you did, or I will let Ignis use you as a chew toy." Dr. Harrison scrambled backward, looking frantically at Victoria, but the current Luna offered no help. She was staring at the gates, calculating her escape. "It was Victoria!" Dr. Harrison screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the Luna. "Kensington Pharmaceuticals funded the clinic. She paid me to lace Clara's recovery IVs with heavy wolfsbane inhibitors. It masked her scent. It artificially tanked her hormone levels to mimic irreversible infertility. She wasn't barren. I swear, Alpha, I was blackmailed." A collective gasp rippled through the pack. Elder Thomas looked as though he had been struck by lightning. Silas slowly turned his head to look at Victoria. The betrayal was so profound, it physically knocked the breath from his lungs. "You poisoned my mate," he whispered, his eyes turning pitch black as his wolf demanded blood. "Oh, you stole my children from me. I did it for the pack," Victoria screamed, stepping backward. "She was weak. I am a pureblood. Furthermore, I secured our future. Gideon!" She looked frantically at the bound rogue leader. "Tell them, I gave you the codes so you could wipe out the dissenters. We had a deal." The admission sealed her fate. Not only had she poisoned the former Luna, but she had orchestrated a massacre of her own pack to consolidate power. The dual betrayal was unforgivable. Silas lunged, but Clara was faster. She stepped between them, her hand raised. "She is not yours to execute, Silas. She broke pack law, but she also conspired with rogues. Her fate belongs to the elders, to rot in the silver-lined cells beneath the mountain until she goes mad." Elder Thomas, eager to distance himself from Victoria's treason, barked orders. 4 warriors immediately seized Victoria, dragging her kicking and screaming toward the subterranean dungeons. "Doctor!" Harrison was hauled away right behind her. With the traitors removed, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the courtyard. Silas turned back to Clara, tears freely falling down his scarred face. He looked at the triplets, his flesh and blood, strong, beautiful, and possessing the very power he had thrown away. "Clara," Silas pleaded, crawling toward her. "I was a fool. I was manipulated by tradition and fear, but they are my children. You are my destined mate. Please, the bond. We can heal it. You can be Luna again. We can be a family." Stella, the smallest of the triplets, stepped out from behind Clara's leg. She looked at Silas with an expression of profound, childish pity. "You made Mama cry in the snow. We don't like you." Clara rested a gentle hand on her daughter's head. She looked down at the Alpha, who had broken her heart, and she felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no longing, just the cold indifference of a survivor looking at a relic of her past. "You don't get to claim us, Silas," Clara said softly, but her voice carried to every listening ear. "You didn't reject a barren woman. You rejected my heart because you lacked the spine to stand by me. You chose the easy path." "I am the Alpha," Silas cried out in desperation, grasping at straws. "By pack law, those pups belong to the Silver Pines." Clara chuckled, a dark, melodic sound. "Pack law applies to wolves." Right on cue, Ignis stepped forward. The dragon wrapped his massive spiked tail protectively around Clara and the triplets, lowering his massive head until he was eye level with Silas. The heat radiating from the beast forced Silas to shuffle backward. "I didn't return to save you, Silas. I returned to save my sister," Clara declared. She looked out at the battered, bleeding members of the Silver Pines. "Your Alpha led you to slaughter. Your Luna sold you to rogues. This pack is broken. I am taking my sister, and I am leaving." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "However, if there are any among you who are tired of weak leadership, tired of ancient, corrupt politics, my territory in the Cascades is vast, and I protect my own." For a moment, nobody moved. Then a young warrior dropped his weapon and walked over to Clara's side. Then an older couple, parents of wolves who had died in the ambush, joined them. Slowly, a steady stream of pack members crossed the courtyard, turning their backs on Silas Blackwood. Nearly half the pack chose the exiled mother of dragons over the Alpha, who had failed them. Silas remained on his knees in the ash, broken and utterly alone, watching as Clara Harrington, the woman he had deemed worthless, walked away with his children, his pack, and a power he could never hope to comprehend. She was no longer a Luna. She was a queen. Would you like to hear more stories about Clara building her ultimate empire? Smash that like button right now. Share this with someone who loves a badass revenge story. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on the next twist.